What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and with fantasy football slowly but surely coming back, I thought what better way to get back into the swing of things than doing a fantasy mock draft. And as you can see, that's exactly what we're going to do. 12-team PPR mock on ESPN. I've got the 5th pick overall, and I've actually done a couple mock drafts here and there, kind of experimenting with where I'd like to pick. And right around this spot is where I've found the most amount of success. And obviously, I'll do a couple more drafts as the off season goes to experiment if what kind of success we can have later on. But for now, 5th pick and ESPN rankings, we can see them right here. We've got the typical Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, David Johnson, Antonio Brown, Zeke top 5. That's your typical top 5. That's your power 5, and that's one of the reasons why I personally like to be in the top 5, because in the event where someone reaches for a player like maybe Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, you can still land, in my opinion, the top 5 difference makers in this year's draft. And even more so if a guy like Antonio Brown goes earlier than the number 5 position, then you can land one of those stud running backs at a very good value. And me personally, I'm a little bit biased, but I really do like going running back, especially in the first round, unless it is just immensely incredible value and a guy like Antonio Brown drops out of the top 5, something like that happens. But the way this draft is going, you can see Le'Veon Bell went number 1. No problems with that. Antonio Brown number 2. Personally, I would have gone running back, but it's hard to argue with Antonio Brown's production the last couple years. He's a PPR stud, constant 1,000-yard receiver, best receiver in fantasy football, no doubt. Then we have Todd Gurley. So I'm going to be in a position where I can take either David Johnson or Ezekiel Elliott. And if you're in the top 5, if you're in a top 5 pick and you have this opportunity, I think you should be absolutely 100% stoked. To me, it's the best scenario. And personally, right now, I'm at number 5, and I can pick David Johnson. So I think this is the best way things could have worked out. And I would say it's kind of a risk picking at number 5 or at number 6 in case you wanted to go running back and one of those top 4 guys wasn't available. But the way this draft is playing out, particularly the way some recent trends have been going, guys like Barkley, like Alvin Kamara have been, getting reached on, and they've allowed guys like Zeke or David Johnson possibly to drop a little bit. And I'll say this: I think if I had the first pick overall, I would have gone David Johnson. He's my top running back. I think he's going to be close to 1,000-yard rusher. And then 1,000 wide receiving yardage player. And then on the flip side, I think a guy like Ezekiel Elliott is going to have a very strong bounce back performance from last year after the suspension, with Dez being gone and Zeke having that chemistry with Dak, and especially after the Cowboys invested some more picks in that offensive line. But let's kind of go back to the draft board now and examine what's been going on. After the Antonio Brown selection, we had a run on the running backs continue with Gurley, Saquon Barkley, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, and Leonard Fournette. Like I said, a guy like Alvin Kamara I've seen go in the top 5. Me personally, I think that's a little bit too rich for my blood. Not saying that he won't be a great player again this year, but after your own coaches come out and say that even with the Mark Ingram suspension, they don't plan on increasing your usage. For me, that's a little bit of a watch out, just because I know with my top 5 guys that I select, I want those guys to be complete workhorses. And that New Orleans Saints offense is just so stacked. And I think they found the perfect balance for Alvin Kamara. And like I said, that probably for me puts him outside the top 4 running backs, but nonetheless, especially in PPR scenarios and within the first 4 weeks, I think he'll be a great addition. And I still think that'll remain the case even when Mark Ingram comes back, but expect a little bit more fluctuations when Ingram does return. And then we have Leonard Fournette. DeAndre Hopkins finally goes off the board at number 9. That's pretty good value. The second best receiver. I personally like him over a guy like Kareem Hunt, who during last year had obviously stints where he was amazing, but then pretty much disappeared for the back end of the season, and then finally kind of reappeared for the last couple of games. That's a little bit concerning, and some question marks remain with how Patrick Mahomes is going to run that offense, how that's going to affect the running game. And then a little bit of a run on receivers starts after that. Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, Julio Jones. And the fact that, we're in a season right now where you can land both Odell and Julio on one team is pretty crazy. But, that's kind of the reality that the back end of the draft presents. After Odell Beckham got injured, after Julio had less than a stellar season, you can land both of these guys, whether it be in a standard or PPR league. And, if you're a person that subscribes to loading up their roster with receivers and, addressing the running back position later, kind of going zero running back strategy, this could be a great draft for you to try and select in the back end of the draft. And then after that, we have Melvin Gordon, who I'm a big fan of. I've seen him go as early as around like the 10th or 11th pick in the first round. And honestly, I would say that to me, I can't knock that too much because, his fifth-year option got picked up. I think he's going to be playing to prove something. But let's kind of go back to our pick here. We're back on the clock. We had Gronk, Christian McCaffrey, A.J. Green go. Probably would have considered taking A.J. Green with his value dipping a little bit towards the end of the second round. I think that would have been a great value pickup. But instead, we're looking at Davante Adams, Mike Evans, LaShawn McCoy, Devontae Freeman. And personally, I do think Davante Adams has the potential. Mike Evans with Jameis Winston scares me a little bit still. LaShawn McCoy, not too sure about. So for that reason, I go Devontae Freeman. I know he had his issues last year with staying healthy, but I think, again, kind of a value situation. At the end of the second round, I think he can be a great addition because once healthy, he's a very versatile player, and I think everyone of that Atlanta offense will get better with another year playing together and under a new offensive coordinator. So right now, unfortunately, we've got a couple auto picks here. So a guy that I was probably targeting in Doug Baldwin won't fall to me. I really like going 2 running backs and then starting to address the wide receiver position afterwards. Personally, I would rather, looking at the receivers that are left, Fitzgerald, T.Y. Hilton, Demaryius Thomas, I'd rather skip out on that and then wait on another turnaround where I think I'd probably be able to land a guy like Josh Gordon, maybe even a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster that is around in the 50s as far as rankings go, that I'm very high on. So right now that leaves me with addressing the running back position again, and I'm looking at McKinnon, I'm looking at Mixon. The reason I'm going to go McKinnon here is because I really like Jimmy Garoppolo, and I've had a lot of success before with the quarterback running back combination, and Jimmy Garoppolo is a quarterback. Obviously, he had a coming out party at the end of last season, put together several wins, and that'll shoot up his value a little bit. But nonetheless, as far as quarterbacks are concerned, they don't go until later rounds. You see Aaron Rodgers went in the third, right at the start of the third round. A guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, depending on what fantasy platform you're using, whether it's ESPN, Yahoo, NFL, they all have different rankings for each quarterback. But let's kind of just look at the quarterback position and see where Jimmy Garoppolo falls here on ESPN. And it's not until they have him ranked as the 172nd best player, which is crazy. I think he'll be a lot better than that personally. But it allows you to get him later on, and I still think get a very quality quarterback that potentially here we'd be able to pair up with McKinnon. There's a little bit of concern, I will say, with McKinnon. My one concern is after he got paid, maybe that the production will kind of diminish a little bit. I do think as far as some of these running backs go, there's, in my opinion, after Joe Mixon, a pretty decent drop-off as far as running back expectations, at least in my book. And McKinnon does have some bust potential, I will say that. I've seen him go with his stock rising a little bit with all the talk about, how he's catching everything in camp, things like that. I've seen him go around in the second round, mid-second round, which I think is a reach personally. I do think that tends to happen in leagues where they go running back heavy, and then some people tend to panic a little bit and go ahead and take the next player at a position of need. I always say kind of try and get the best player available. And I think so far I've kind of stuck to that. David Johnson definitely falls under that category for me. Freeman, I knew I wanted to go running back again. He was the next best available running back. And then with Jerick McKinnon still being available in the third round on the turnaround, I knew that was the guy that I wanted to go with, considering the receivers that I viewed were a little bit, subpar in my opinion. And looking at, again, going to the draft board, the guys that went after my selection of McKinnon, we had T.Y. Fitzgerald, Mark Ingram. If I had to wager, I'd say that was an auto pick, because me personally, I don't touch Ingram before the 5th round. And personally, honestly, he's on my do not draft list. Not only does he have that 4-game suspension, but he also will have to split carries with Alvin Kamara, and that's no easy feat. So for that reason, Mark Ingram becomes just too big of a question mark to store on my team. But everyone's different. You might have a different viewpoint of how Ingram's going to come back and how he'll perform. And then this run on the running backs continues with Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Sony Michel. Then we have Tom Brady finally being chosen, Zach Ertz, Demaryius Thomas, Josh Gordon. And here you kind of see it, Josh Gordon going in the early 4th round. I've seen him go in the right around this range, early 4th, late 4th. If he can stay on the field and not have any issues, and you can get at least average to above average quarterback play, I think Josh Gordon's ADP, which is, like I said, right around the 4th round, offers pretty good value, I would say. So if you need a wide receiver that can bust out onto the scene, Josh Gordon can definitely do so, I would say. And now going back to the draft board, I know I got to go receiver here. I would love it if Stephon Diggs makes it down to me. And of course, right as I say that, he gets drafted, followed by Alshon Jeffrey. So right now, I know I have to go receiver. I like Jarvis Landry as a PPR slot guy. A little bit concerned with his transition to Cleveland, but I still think he'll get the targets. But looking at this group of guys, Landry, Julian Edelman, and Juju, I actually have Juju ranked the highest in my personal rankings. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and make him my selection right here in the end of the 4th round. I think that's pretty good value. He's a guy that I think can fill that, similar to what a lot of people thought Martavius Bryant could potentially be last year, until he had some issues. I think Juju can be that. And again, think of what can happen if Antonio Brown misses some time or gets hurt. Juju becomes even that much more valuable. So let's now go back to the draft board, and unfortunately both Jarvis Landry and Julian Edelman were selected. But there is a guy in Amari Cooper who's still available in the 5th round, which I think is crazy. I know obviously he didn't have the best year last year, and that's this ADP for him right now is a direct reflection of that. But regardless of that, this is incredible value for a guy that was going, in the end of the 2nd round, somewhere in the 2nd round last year. I think Amari Cooper, getting him in the 5th round is something you can't pass up on. And right now, kind of just going back to my roster with David Johnson, Devonta Freeman, and McKinnon, I'd say, I'd put up this set of running backs against anyone. I like having that running back as my flex player. I think they, allow a little bit more upside than a receiver at that position. And then my 2 receivers with Juju, who I was able to get in the end of the 4th round, and Amari Cooper in the middle of the 5th round. I think that's very good value for what it is. And again, I have a personal preference with Juju. I think every year, as a player in fantasy, you identify someone that you think is going to have a breakout year that you kind of just have to have on your roster. For me, it's Juju this year, and very happy I was able to land him. And then on top of that, Amari Cooper in the 5th round. Very happy how I was able to rebound on my wide receivers, considering I didn't select one up until the 4th round. And now going back to the selection and the picks, Marvin Jones, another player I like, had a strong back half of the season last year, and being able to get him at the end of the 5th round, I've seen, end of the 5th round, 6th round territory for Marvin Jones. I think, again, that's pretty good value. I wouldn't be upset if I had him as my wide receiver 2, or if I had 3 wide receivers on my roster and I played one at the flex, which, I think will happen from time to time, whether it's injuries or whatnot. I'd be very happy having Marvin Jones there. Right now, as I look at the players available and my roster needs, I definitely need a tight end. Would love it if Greg Olsen falls to me. Again, he was obviously a player that was affected by his injury from last year, didn't really play. Before that, he had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, so, don't sleep on Greg Olsen. But even with that said, I do think his ADP dropping is kind of deserved because of all the different weapons that Carolina offense has added with DJ Moore, Torrey Smith, Christian McCaffrey. So that will, make no mistake about it, take targets away from Greg Olsen. Obviously, that's assuming that no one on that offense gets hurt, but still, I think Greg Olsen will see a little bit of a decline in catches and in yardage as well. But I wouldn't even have that option right now to go ahead and draft him as he was taken a little bit before I got to go and make a selection. So right now I can go ahead and kind of look at some of the tight ends that are still left: Evan Ingram, Jack Doyle, Jordan Reed, Kyle Rudolph, Jimmy Graham, and I think I can wait on the tight ends a little bit and kind of have right now a pick where I can go just a player that I like, because I feel pretty confident with my running backs, feel pretty confident with my wide receivers. There's not a wide receiver that I want to reach on at this moment. So going down the draft board, what I'm going to do is actually select a guy in Marlon Mack that I think could potentially be a breakout player later on in the season, and stash him on my bench. And now as the draft progresses a little bit, I find myself on the clock again, and this is probably right around where I could go tight end. I like the potential of a Jordan Reed with Alex Smith going to Washington and all the success he's had with tight ends in the past. Obviously, the big question mark is, can Jordan Reed stay healthy? If that is the case, then I think he will have a great year. But I'll say that I think I can go ahead and land him on my next turnaround. So for now, I'll go with a guy in Randall Cobb, who has always been a very good PPR option. And with Jordy Nelson leaving Green Bay, I think he can be in for a big year. And I'll go ahead, stash him on my bench. Really like how my bench is turning out. I'll invest probably 2 more rounds of selections into this mock draft and then conclude it. Add a tight end, add a quarterback, because after that, from that point on, filling out the bench in these mock drafts and the kicker and defense position kind of doesn't really provide much value just because everyone's going to be on auto pick, things like that. But definitely we'll go ahead and make 2 more selections. And going down the roster, I like Jordan Reed. I like a guy in Marquise Goodwin. Really like the chemistry he had with Jimmy Garoppolo. This is where you can start thinking. I meant to go ahead and select Tavon Coleman. This is where you can go and start thinking handcuffs to some of your starting running backs. Tavon Coleman is a must-own if you're a Devonta Freeman owner, in my opinion. You saw how valuable he was when Devonta Freeman was out last year for the Falcons. So I think if you go ahead and choose Devonta Freeman in the second, at the end of the second round, definitely make plans to go ahead and draft Tavon Coleman as well. And we just had Kyle Rudolph go, who for me is a tight end again that I also like. All the reports coming out of Minnesota are that Kirk Cousins has looked really good, that he's gonna improve the yardage situation in the in the reception wise for all those pass catchers, including Kyle Rudolph. So I'm excited to see whether that happens or not. I think Rudolph is a guy with some really nice potential. But for now, it looks like once it gets back to me that I will go Jordan Reed if he's still there. And of course, he is no longer there. So, for the sake of filling out this roster, I'm going to go ahead and add a guy in Tyler Eifert at the tight end position. In Cincinnati, when he's healthy, he is, I will say, I think a viable option. And then right now at the quarterback position, I'll go ahead and add Jimmy Garoppolo, so I kind of round out this roster and then allow us to do a final look into it and then a little bit of an analysis. So the way this turned out, we've got Jimmy Garoppolo at the quarterback position, and I would say again, getting him in the 9th round, decent value. I don't like to wait super long like some people to get a quarterback. Even though guys like Drew Brees and Matthew Stafford are still available, I like to kind of fill out my roster a little bit before filling out the entirety of my bench. Then we've got David Johnson, Devonta Freeman, Jerick McKinnon. Like I said before, I really like my trio of running backs. Wide receiver Juju Smith, Amari Cooper. I think both those guys will have strong seasons. I think Amari Cooper will bounce back. And I think Juju Smith will also, continue on his trajectory. If I had to pick a guy that I was a little bit more worried about, it would probably be Amari Cooper, just with all the additions in Oakland, with Martavius Bryant, with Jordy Nelson. Tight end position with Tyler Eifert, that obviously is the one that stands out. Could be a lot better, but sometimes that's what happens when you focus on other areas. But I'm not too mad about that, considering I was able to get a guy on my bench with Marlon Mack, who I think has a lot of potential, and then in Randall Cobb, again, who I think fits really well in a PPR setting in Green Bay. So overall, if this was my actual roster come fantasy season, I'd be very pleased with this roster myself personally, especially in a PPR format. I think I've got some really good PPR players. So let me know what you guys thought. Do you agree with these selections? Would you have gone similar routes with the picks in the rounds that I went? Do you agree with the analysis? So let me hear it in the comments section. If you guys have any questions, let me hear those as well. And as always, if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.